What are the most broken abilities in League of Legends? Well, I asked you all to choose up to 10 abilities you thought were the most broken, and these were the results from the over 37,000 votes I received. So thank you so much to everyone who voted. Don't forget to subscribe to help me hit 200k subs, and let's get into things. The 20th most broken ability in League with 400 votes goes to Echo's R Chrono Breaker. Now, I think this ability in particular has always been in contention for the most broken abilities because it's essentially an undo button, a Control Z in League of Legends. I mean, really, what more can you ask for? And not only does it help you escape impossible situations, but it also does a ridiculous amount of damage, something I think so many people underestimate. For some reason or another, very few players pay attention to where Echo's ultimate is trailing, and I suppose it's also somewhat understandable, but it's still kind of impressive. I guess it's not a lot of people's first priority during a hectic team fight to see where Echo's shadow's at, but that's partially what makes it so dangerous because the burst damage that this thing can inflict is kind of insane. On top of all that, Chrono Breaker also makes chasing Echo a living nightmare. Hey, really quick, thank you OperaGX for sponsoring this video. Now let me explain why you need this browser as a gamer and a League player. To start, OperaGX can actually help you play League better. It has a feature called GX Control that allows you to limit the CPU and RAM usage, which can not only fix your high ping, but also help with your frame rate. Something that has saved my butt more than once because these days my PC is getting to be a piece of shit. I mean, look at this comparison on Chrome versus the OperaGX browser. I swear Chrome is intentionally trying to sabotage your computer sometimes. Anyways, this browser is also customizable with GX mods, meaning you can use something like the legendary Rift GX mod, which also comes with background music, keyboard sounds, unique sounds when opening and closing tabs, and as you've already seen, a customized theme, all of which can also be switched on and off on the sidebar too. And there are a ton of different mods to choose from. Also, speaking of the sidebars, OperaGX also comes with tabs for almost every big social media platform, which is super convenient. And it also has one for Twitch that will even notify you when people go live. But my favorite feature by far is still GX Corner, which is literally the perfect gamer resource, and I swear this alone makes OperaGX worth getting. It tells you when new games are coming out, it tells you when games are going on sale, and it even tells you when games become free all in one place. But anyways, seriously, make sure to use my link below and download OperaGX today. And now back to the video. Alright, moving on to the 19th most broken ability in League with 401 votes, we got Illaoi's E, otherwise known as Test of the Spirit. Now, I know this video is about the strongest and most broken abilities in the game, but I just have to say, on top of it being broken, this also has to be one of the most annoying abilities out there. If you've ever had the pleasure of laning versus this champion, you'd know just how painful it really is to play versus this ability. Getting your spirit ripped out of you is bad enough, but then having her get to beat up your broken spirit with her noodles is just salt in the wound. Illaoi thrives off of AoE damage, so the fact that she can just create another one of you to smack around is kind of crazy. And not only does she get to have another target to deal damage to, but she also gets another target to heal off of. Not to mention the slows, the constant random spawning tentacles, it's just a crazy flustercluck. Now, yes, it is a skill shot, so you do have to hit it for it to be viable, but first off, I honestly don't think it's that hard to hit. And second, at a certain point, she can just walk up to your face and fire that thing point blank, so there's not much you can do anyways. There's also probably very few things in this game that feel worse than getting hit with her E, finally getting out of Noodle Land just to immediately get hit with another E. It's the best. On to the 18th most broken ability in League with 403 votes, we have Uxion's passive Dirty Fighting. Okay, this one I was actually fairly shocked to see this high on this list, not because I don't think it's strong, but I don't know if it's as broken as some of the other ones up here. And because of this, I have some speculation that there actually might have been some accidental votes cast. To clarify, Uxion's normal passive is that every 3 hits his abilities deal bonus damage and grants him a shield if the target was a champion. He also fires an additional attack, and if he cancels the second attack, he gets movement speed. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a strong ability, and there's been a number of times I've seen people thrown off by that random shield popping out of nowhere, and 3-hit passives are always strong, but I'm assuming that at least a few people that voted for this assumed that this was his resurrection ability, which is actually his W's passive. Don't ask me why, it doesn't really make that much sense to me either, but if that is the case, it does change things up a bit. Nevertheless, Uxion's passive is still a pretty strong ability. Moving on, the 17th most broken ability in League with 410 votes goes to K'Sante's R, otherwise known as All Out. Now, I personally would not have guessed that it would be this high up on the list, but nevertheless, it's a pretty strong ability. His ability yeets people through walls, which in itself is pretty nasty, but I honestly think more people were referring to the broken part as his ability to go into attack mode and deal an absurd amount of damage as a full tank champion. I mean, seriously, no one who builds straight tank should ever be able to dish out this much damage. It's kind of ridiculous. I mean, you know it's bad when Showmaker absolutely loses his mind over this champion and ability. The 16th most broken ability in League with 413 votes was actually a tie between Fiora's passive Duelist Dance and Camille's Q Precision Protocol. Let's start off with Fiora's passive. Duelist Dance really is actually a pretty simple ability, but it's also extremely effective, especially with her kit. Being able to have vitals spawn around your opponent that guarantees you'll deal bonus true damage, get health back, and give you movement speed at the same time is pretty busted. And the fact that these vitals are constantly spawning makes fighting Fiora a straight up pain in the ass. It essentially means that if you ever fight her, you have to hug a wall to block the vital or just take it right up the... The craziest thing is Fiora's vitals aren't even entirely random, so you don't even have to predict where the next one will be. Having vitals constantly spawn around you that you have to keep paying attention to is also just straight up irritating to play against. Now Camille's Q, on the other hand, is a completely separate beast. Having an ability that does bonus physical damage not once, not twice, but essentially 3 times is pretty crazy. And I say essentially 3 times because the second Q does double the bonus damage if it's cast after 1.5 seconds from the first. But what really sets this ability apart is that some, if not all of the Q's second damage is dealt as true damage. Early game this isn't as effective, but once you get into the mid and late game, Camille absolutely shreds the balls off of every single champion. And thanks to the true damage, it doesn't even matter if you're a tank or not. It's honestly impressive how much damage one ability alone can dish out by itself, not to mention the auto attack reset opportunities it provides too. Moving on to the 15th most broken ability in League, we got another tie between Samira's R Inferno Trigger and Karthus's R Requiem. Let's start off with Samira's ult. Ever since this champion was advertised with their champion spotlight, and after watching her ultimate being introduced, I think everyone already knew how broken this ability was going to be. Never before Samira have we seen an ultimate that essentially had a 0-second cooldown. I mean, the ult in itself is already strong. You turn into a spitting top of doom, dishing out crazy amounts of damage that can both crit and lifesteal for you, but the fact that she can cast it on a whim whenever she gets to her S rank is what really makes this ability broken. I mean, there's a reason that she's constantly one of, if not the top most likely champion to get a pentakill in the entire game, and that reason is entirely thanks to her ultimate. Once you see her start doing spinny circles, you just know it's not going to end well for you. And when it comes to Karthus's ult, I almost feel like I don't even need to do any explaining, as it's pretty obvious why it's in the top 15. And a part of me is even surprised that it's not even in the top 10. Nevertheless, Karthus's ult Requiem is at the center of the staple meme of press R to win. Now, of course, there are other abilities out there that also match the same description, but as we all know, Karthus's ult takes the cake. You quite literally just need to press R in order to inflict a ridiculous amount of damage to their team and get free kills. Yes, there are a lot of global abilities in the game too, but only one where you don't even need to aim that also does damage to their entire team. I mean, just talking about it almost makes it seem like it shouldn't even exist because it's that absurd of a concept, but here we are. Truly the most OP outplay ability in the game. Alright, the 14th most broken ability in League with 437 votes goes to none other than Jax's E Counter-Strike, otherwise known as the helicopter ability. Jax has literally been around since the beginning of League, and his E has notoriously always been one of those few abilities everyone hates because of how good it is. Not only does it allow him to dodge all incoming basic attacks, but it also causes him to take 25% reduced damage from all area of effect abilities, and it will stun your opponent at the end or after being recast. On top of all that, it also does a fair amount of magic damage. I feel like all of those combined is the borderline definition of broken. Also, thanks to his Q or jump, it has little to no counterplay, since the best counterplay to begin with would just be to avoid it, but since he can just jump onto your face, it makes it a bit hard. That's what she said. Next, the 13th most broken ability in League with 449 votes goes to the clown of a champion himself, Shaco, specifically Shaco's Q Deceive. When you think about it, this ability is essentially an extra flash that has a 10 to 12 second cooldown that also makes him go invisible. Not only can he blink over walls and go invisible for a duration of time, but he can also still drop his boxes and use his ultimate while he's invisible. Oh yeah, that seems like a great idea. And then once he finally does come out of his invisibility, his next basic attack gets to deal bonus physical damage for free. And you might be saying, well, at the very least, you can always ward properly to see Shaco coming, but no, you can't, because his Q is considered invisibility and control wards only work on camouflage. Let's just say this ability definitely deserves to be on this list, and number 13 is fairly respectable. Moving on, the 12th most broken ability was actually a tie between Malzahar's R Nether Grasp and Fiora's W Riposte, with both abilities receiving 470 votes. Let's start with Malzahar's R. This is probably one of the most most patented press R to outplay abilities out there. When someone thinks of a no skill ability that does a ridiculous amount of damage and screws people over, Malzahar's R is probably at the top of the list. It's always fun watching those matchups where a really mechanical champion like Zed goes up against a Malzahar, drops their entire combo jumping all over the place just for Malzahar to walk up and press R once and call it a day. That's when the true hatred for these abilities really comes out. Jokes aside, it's pretty crazy to think about how easy it is to immobilize someone for an eternity while also just sucking them to death. A top tier broken ability for sure. Now Fiora's W Riposte is equally as deserving to be as high on this list, but for very different reasons. As a Fiora player, I kinda knew before the voting even started that this ability was going to be up high on this list. And if it wasn't, I would have been very surprised because it's pretty freaking broken. There are very few abilities out there that allow you to defend and attack at the same time, and there are no other abilities that allow you to do it in the way Fiora's W does. With the exception of turret shots, not only can you negate all types of incoming damage, including but not limited to ignite, but you can also deal some damage and provide a slow or a stun if you make contact with the enemy champion, which really isn't that hard to do since you've gotten an unlimited amount of dashes in your kit. Anyways, the ability to stop all damage and deflect any CC abilities back at your opponents is actually ridiculous, and it feels even stronger, especially when facing champions like Karthus or Malphite, where you can essentially counter their entire ultimate with one basic ability. On top of that, even if you don't riposte a CC ability, the slow that you apply from just hitting them is extremely beneficial. It's basically a mini exhaust. So to say the least, Fiora's W is definitely a broken ability. With that being said, I do think it's a pretty unique ability that fits her playstyle and champion really well, so at least there's that. Alright, with 500 votes, the 11th most broken ability in League goes to Set's W Haymaker. Remember when I said there were very few abilities out there that allow you to defend and attack at the same time? Well, Set's W is one of those abilities. And not just one of them, but it's objectively the best ability in the game to do that. Honestly, the fact that this ability isn't even in the top 10 is a bit crazy to me, but I guess it just goes to show how many ridiculous abilities are truly in this game. I mean, there's a lot of abilities out there that give you a shield. That's pretty standard. But none of them, except this one, not even Fiora's W, allows you to take that damage and deal it back to them in more than full force. Plus, the fact it does true damage on top of all that is even crazier. To be blunt, this single W basic ability single-handedly makes fighting this champion a pain in the ass. Fighting him just sucks because you always know he's got that ace up his sleeve. And so many times, even if you think you can win, he just pops his W, gets the massive shield, and throws all the damage you just dealt to him down your throat. It's one of the abilities that literally had its own meta created around it because it was that strong. The era of mathematical set and him one-shotting your entire team was truly terrifying. Any ability that temporarily breaks the League of Legends meta deserves to be put on this list. It's also really crazy to think about, and something that a lot of people don't know is that Sylas was originally supposed to have Set's W, but they decided to pass it off to Set instead. Honestly, I don't know if that would have been worse or better, but either way, it's kind of interesting. Alright, we have now made it to the top 10 most broken abilities in League of Legends, and starting at number 10 with 508 votes, we got Viego's passive Sovereign's Domination. In addition to it obviously being broken, this is by far one of the most unique abilities in the game. It's essentially what makes Viego Viego, allowing him to transform into other enemies after they die and use their abilities in items. Not only that, but it also heals Viego for a percentage of the target's max health. There's quite literally no other ability like this in League of Legends. Now, while I think this ability is strong, I do think that it needs to be used correctly in order to reach its maximum level of brokenness. And as you've seen from some of the abilities in the top 20 already, that's not always the case. So it's just something to take into consideration. In order to truly utilize Viego's passive, you really need to know how every single ability works in League and know what and when to play each champion for each scenario. Nevertheless, it's a really cool ability and definitely one of the strongest out there in the right hands. Alright, the 9th most broken ability in League goes to Pyke's R, Death from Below. Now before we start, let me remind you that this is a support champion we're talking about. And with that, let's get into this insane ability. Having the ability to execute enemies as a support champion is pretty ridiculous, but to get a free reset upon each kill is even crazier. Pyke is probably the only support champion out there where it is not unheard of for him to get pentakills, and it's all thanks to his ultimate. Honestly, even if it wasn't for a support champion, it'd be a pretty disgusting ability to have. Any kind of execute in this game is dangerous, but having one that allows resets and has blinks is almost unfair. And things don't even end there, because each successful execution he gets also grants extra gold to the last assisting ally and vice versa. A quite broken ability indeed. Moving on, the 8th most broken ability in League with 595 votes goes to Yuumi's W, the ability that makes the cat the most beloved champion in the game. Now obviously the main motivation for voting for this ability has to be the fact that she can hop onto any ally champion. It still kind of baffles me that this ever made it into the game, and honestly, I think even Riot kind of regrets ever adding it in as well. I mean, over the few years Yuumi's been around, she's caused a disgusting amount of issues for both normal League players and the League of Legends pro scene. And it's all thanks to this one little ability that literally lets other people carry you. In addition to her being able to hop on different champions, she also, thanks to her fairly recent update, provides a best friend bonus, which gives extra healing and shielding. As dumb as this ability is, it is no doubt very, very broken. Alright, the 7th most broken ability in League with 646 votes, actually a pretty big jump from 8, goes to Gwen's W, Hollowed Mist. I feel like a lot of people don't really talk about Gwen too much anymore. Ever since the Ruination event, she's kind of slipped under the radar, but nevertheless, there's no doubt that her W is a force to be reckoned with. Having the ability to summon a zone that grants you bonus armor, bonus magic resistance, and makes you untargetable to all enemies is quite poggers, as they say. Not only that, but it lasts for 4 seconds and you can even move it once, which is a crazy concept. I think if Gwen was released where the W would just stay where it was casted and you couldn't move it, no one would even blink an eye. That's how strong this ability is. Honestly, Gwen's W is every ranged champion's worst nightmare because in order to do damage to her, you have to get close to her, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of being a ranged champion. If you have an ability that counters what's supposed to counter you, then that's what I would describe as broken. The 6th most broken ability in League with 658 votes goes to Yone's E, Soul Unbound. Now, if you thought Echo's ultimate was broken, try having a mini version of that, but as a basic ability. That's pretty much Yone's E, except there's even more. In addition to being able to pop out from his body and recall to it anytime he wishes, he also becomes ghosted during the process, making it easier to chase people down. Additionally, he can also mark champions by simply smacking them, something he'll probably be doing anyways. And then once he recasts his E or the time runs out, he can detonate those marks, dealing true damage. After the cast time, he also can cleanse himself from any immobilizing effects. Look, I know number 6 is pretty high up there for broken abilities, but even so, I almost feel like it at least deserves top 5. I mean, come on, it's pretty nasty. I mean, you can even use it to hop over walls. Either way, it 100% deserves to be at least this high on the list. Now finally into the top 5. The 5th most broken ability in League of Legends goes to, of course, Yasuo's Wind Wall. It is honestly such a simple ability, but at the same time, it's just such a big FU to so many champions. Setting up a wall that blocks all projectiles besides turrets, of course, is objectively broken. I mean, how many times have we all been there where we're trying to kill this dumb champion, but then he just throws up his stupid wall and denies everything with one basic ability? Pretty fun stuff. On to the 4th most broken ability in League, we have Uxion's W. Now, before I even start with this, it's worth mentioning how big of a gap there was between the 5th most broken ability and the 4th. Everything up until now has been a difference of maybe 50 votes max, but this was a jump from 685 votes to 900 votes for Uxion's W. Pretty wild. Anyways, Uxion was probably at the peak of the holy crap our League of Legends abilities and new champions gain such insanely complicated abilities and ability descriptions era. And for good reason, because I mean, look at this, it's ridiculous. And his E is even worse, but that's beside the point. Anyways, while Uxion's W has an active and a passive, I'm 99% sure that almost everyone voted for Uxion's W due to his passive, which allows allies to be resurrected if Uxion scores a takedown against a scoundrel. Now, don't get me wrong, his active ability that allows him to camouflage himself is actually pretty good, but in this case, I think it's more of just an extra cherry on top. Because let's face it, any ability that lets you resurrect your team and literally turn the tides of games for you, especially when those death timers become chunky, deserves to be titled one of the most broken abilities in the game. What's kind of crazy to think about is, theoretically speaking, if a decent amount of people who voted for Uxion's normal passive did in fact actually mean to vote for his W passive, then this ability could be in contention for the #1 spot. At this point though, it doesn't really matter, so let's just move on to number 3. The 3rd most broken League of Legends ability with 952 votes goes to Master Yi's Q, Alpha Strike. As far as the most well-known and notorious broken ability goes, this probably comes out on top. As we all know, Yi's Q is infamous for being absolutely busted, as well as being a no-brain ability to use. A perfect combination for a truly broken ability. It's essentially what makes Yi Yi, and it's what makes Yi a menace to play against, especially as squishy ADCs. Dealing with assassins is hard enough, but dealing with assassins that vanish every couple seconds while doing damage to you is a completely different ballgame. Plus, the fact that they made it so he can now even select what direction he comes out of alpha in is truly the icing on the cake. It's almost nostalgic that this ability still remains as one of the most broken abilities in this game. And next in the runner-up position, the 2nd most broken ability in League of Legends, of course, goes to Tryndamere's R, Undying Rage. I mean, let's be honest, who didn't see this one coming? An ability that allows you to become invulnerable for 5 seconds almost seems unrealistic to have in a game like this, but here we are. I always think it's funny how the community talks about how broken the abilities are when new champions are released, and sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. But I've always wondered what today's community's reaction would be if they were to release a champion with Tryndamere's ult today. Unfortunately, we never really got to see a reaction since it was one of the first champions released, but man, I think it'd be hilarious. People would absolutely lose their f***ing minds, and rightfully so. I mean, everyone has experienced how frustrating it is to play against this ult because you just know sometimes there is literally nothing you can do against him because of it. And then if you do fight him and think it's just about to run out, it feels like it never does. Plus, it grants him instant fury, which is also fun. It's an ability definitely worth the title as runner-up for the most broken ability in League of Legends. However, the honor of the most broken ability in League of Legends goes to the one and only Fizz. Specifically, Fizz's E, Play, and Trickster. This was actually a landslide victory for the #1 spot. For perspective, the difference between the third and second spot was only 2 votes, and the difference between the second and first spot was 212 votes. Fizz's E raked in 1,166 votes. In other words, over a quarter of everyone who voted on this poll agreed that Fizz's E deserves one of their votes for the most broken ability. Pretty crazy. Nevertheless, it's pretty easy to see why this was voted to be the most broken. I mean, it's an ability that allows him to become untargetable as well as do ridiculous amounts of damage. And sometimes it even applies a 2-second slow. On top of that, it also acts as an untargetable dash, and he essentially has 2 dashes or hops built into it, making it even more versatile. Due to its ability to become untargetable, it also makes things like turret diving squishy mid laners or ADCs feel like a walk in the park. Trying to fight a champion that you can't even target half the time is everyone's worst nightmare. Anyways, there you have it. Those are the most broken abilities in League of Legends chosen by you. And if you're wondering where all the other abilities are placed in the rankings, here's a quick glimpse at the top 100 most broken abilities. I'll also leave a link to the full list in the description if you're interested. Lastly, I need your help in voting for the next Chosen by You episode where I'm trying to find the easiest and the hardest champions to play in the game. So if you could take a minute or two to help vote, I would greatly appreciate it. The link will be in the description. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Thanks to everyone who voted on this episode. Please consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. I really wanted to give a massive shout out to all my patrons and members who have stuck around with me this far. I know I haven't been around much lately. I actually just moved. Life is still kind of crazy for me, but I seriously appreciate each and every one of you guys. Setright, Hagel, Gooseman, Weehat, and a huge shout out to Stefan, Chris, and Noctac for continuing to be tier 3 patrons. Seriously, thank you all so freaking much. You have no idea how much you've actually helped me out. Thanks to everyone else who supported me as well, and I will see you next time. Bye.